Okay, I have it as 3 p.m. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So hello and welcome everyone to our lived experiences panel, where we're going to be discussing navigating justice spaces and identifying opportunities for change. And now identifying opportunities for change in the criminal legal system requires that we listen to those who know it best, those who've been impacted by or worked within it. And today we'll be hearing from a group of panelists who can provide insight on the legal system from a variety of perspectives, and who are doing the really important work to identify and activate these opportunities for change. It's my pleasure to facilitate this terrific panel today. My name is Ben Mackey. I'm a research associate here at the Center for Advancing Correctional Excellence. Joining me today, we have CJ Appleton, Cait Kannewske, and Andrew Madrigal at George Mason University, and we have Dr. Esther Matthews at Gonzaga University. Welcome to the four of you. Thank you so much for joining for what I'm really hoping is a cool, calm, casual, and interesting discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to the panelists so they can give their own introductions, do that hard work. And as they do so, I'm going to ask the four of you to please share your lived experience with the criminal legal system as you give your introduction. So I'd like to turn it over to Esther first. Hi, Esther.
Hi, Ben. So first I want to say, if you want this to be calm, cool, and casual, have you met any of us yet? No, just kidding.
Who are you?
So my experience, did you want me to share my experience in the legal system?
Yes, please.
Okay. So my experience in the criminal legal system, I was incarcerated. I do have a juvenile record, but I was never incarcerated. I only served on probation. I was arrested shortly after turning 20. So I served 2 to 3 days in a county jail. And then I really had my big criminal experience when I was about 30, and I served 4 years in a federal institution. Was charged with 4 felonies, got out about 10 years ago, was on probation for about 3 years. That was a horrific experience. And now I am an academic researcher in the corrections and reentry field.
All right, thanks so much for that introduction, Esther. Andrew, let's turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you for having me. My name is Andrew Madrigal. I am a second-year doctoral student here at George Mason University. And my experience is pretty much through my father, who was wrongfully convicted when he was sentenced to 53 years to life in prison in California back in 2000, and was exonerated in 2009. In addition to that, I've had numerous family members and close friends who've had pretty significant interactions with the criminal legal system. And my work here at George Mason revolves around wrongful conviction research and reentry.
Awesome, thank you, Andrew. Cait, you're up next.
Hey, thanks so much, Ben. Really pleased to be here. Esther's right. We're probably not the most calm, cool, and collected crew that you'll run by, because we're all very driven by passion and excitement and things like that. My name is Cait Kannewske. I am a doctoral student at doctoral candidate at George Mason, hopefully defending the dissertation in just a couple weeks. My experience was as a young, after I finished my undergraduate degree with English and was a rather aimless young person, I came across an opportunity to teach in the New Mexican prison system through a program run by AmeriCorps. I did that for several years, and a very dedicated group of educators there, but not surprisingly, severely overburdened and underfunded. So when I came as a very young person with almost no teaching experience, suddenly I was teaching, cognitive behavioral therapy and college classes and GED and all these different things, just because there was such a need for it, and there was such a desire for it. within the institution. So that's generally how I got involved in criminal justice or criminal legal research. Shortly after leaving that position, I came to work at Mason with ACE and the Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy and things like that, and have been doing that since.
All right, thank you, Cait. Great to have you here. CJ, last but not least, can you please introduce yourself?
What's up, everybody? My name is CJ Appleton, and I am a third-year doctoral student at George Mason, and I also work at ACE, the greatest place in the whole entire world. And my experience in the criminal justice system, I got in trouble for the first time when I was 17, got tried as an adult. I didn't realize the implications of that back then. I just wanted it to all be over really fast. And from 17 to 27, I was never out of jail longer than 6 months. 6 months was the record. Most of the time it was more like 3 because I kind of decided that probation and parole wasn't legitimate. So I would just get out and just not report. I didn't want to participate. And I also have been to the prison. I served 15 months in prison, and altogether with all the prison and all my probation and parole revocations and many violations, I think I've done around like 3.5 or 4 years incarcerated, and I got arrested for the last time 4/22/12. So that's also my clean date. So I just recently got 10 years clean a couple days ago. So it's interesting. I actually have now the same amount of time post my criminal life or whatever that I had in it. So it's 10 years and 10 years. So it's an interesting milestone.
All right. Thank you, CJ, and congratulations. And thank you to all 4 of you for sharing your stories, and again, for being on this panel. We've got a few questions for discussion today. I'm hoping we can get the audience engaged too, to ask some more questions about lived experience and how you go about using that in your work. So to get us kicked off, I want to ask, and please feel free, anyone, to jump in. If you don't jump in, I will be picking on some of you. So I want to ask, do you draw on your lived experiences to inform your work? And if so, how do you do so? How do you mix in that lived experience into whatever work you're doing currently?
It's like double dutch. It's like when you're a kid. I can go first because I was thinking, I had a thought. It's fascinating to me because I believe that my lived experience grounds me in reality. If I imagine sometimes what I would think about the criminal justice system if I only had read articles and read books. And it's fascinating that these books say nonfiction, but from a person who has lived experience, they seem like fantastical. Hey, they're creating this world. I'm like, what? Like, that's what probation and parole is like? Like, that sounds like fiction to me. This doesn't really sound like it's reality, and it's often not the biggest differences, but it's in the details that are missed. And what I think is an extremely powerful position in our society is the person who gets to develop the questions, because the details are missed because the questions aren't being asked. And oftentimes the questions aren't being asked because people just either don't know about the question or they don't seem to think that it's very important. And I don't think that it's a sinister thing. Oftentimes, I think it's just, if all you've done is read on a subject, then your focus is going to be in a different place. And so I see it as a gift and a responsibility to ask certain types of questions and kind of get into the cracks of the structure that kind of already exists to kind of fill that in. And so that's how I use my lived experience.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I really agree, CJ. And I, it especially speaks to me when you say you can read books, you can watch documentaries, you can engage in all that. And still, for me, it really comes down to a degree of empathy that hits you on a very cellular level as far as understanding experiences. And of course, mine is different than, carceral residents. My experience is coming in from sort of the other side of that, part of the staff, part of the administration. But all the same, I think that you really don't have that degree of empathy and understanding unless you're seeing more of these things firsthand. And engaging with people, forming relationships and friendships, and sort of getting a more cellular, deep level of understanding for why reform is necessary, and seeing how deeply dysfunctional a system is, especially when you're trying to operate inside of it as far as sort of a quote unquote positive influence. So our goal was to be increasing education, to help lend itself to positive outcomes post-release and things like that. So trying to accomplish those goals in an incredibly adversarial, within an adversarial administration. It gives you an idea for why prison reform and reform efforts are difficult and things like that. So that's what I would say.
Esther, Andrew, anything to add?
Kind of to echo both of you. The main reason I chose to pursue a doctoral degree was because I noticed that a lot of the research that was being done on exonerees and other formerly incarcerated people was being done by people who didn't really have the interaction with the criminal legal system. And I felt like I needed to tell my dad's story and other people's stories in ways that not only academia could understand, which I think is really important, because a lot of our research and a lot of what's talked about is put into terms that normal people wouldn't even comprehend unless it was like covered through news coverage, right? So that's just my 2 cents on that. I think it's important, at least from everyone here, to share these experiences with not just academia, but with the world, to make that change that we so desire. So yeah.
Okay.
So I definitely, I loved what CJ said about asking the questions. I think that's the biggest way that I use my lived experience to inform my work, is knowing the right questions to ask. And I think it's one of the things that I feel honored to be able to do, is ask the right follow-up questions. It's not always even just the initial question, but asking the right follow-up question, because sometimes when people are telling their stories, they keep the most intimate and vulnerable parts of that story hidden, and it's there because it's in your story too, and so you can go to there where somebody else might not be able to access that. And it also helps you build rapport with people, right? Because when you ask that question, somebody knows that they're seen. And so I think that that's really important to validate and to make the people who are answering these questions feel really safe. But I also wanted to speak to Andrew's point. Because of I have a fairly limited lived experience when you look at the average person in our criminal legal system. And I've only recently become more familiar with people who have served decades and decades of time, and people who have been exonerated, or juveniles who've been resentenced. And I think that the carceral experience is very different for someone who only endured it for 3 to 4 years like I did, versus somebody who endured it for decades. And especially if that endurance started when they were 14 or 15, that carceral experience and that damage and that trauma is so much more compounded by every year, every dehumanizing experience. And so I think not only does it help me ask the right questions, but knowing that people often don't understand the level of my trauma or dehumanization helps me be quicker to understand that I don't understand what you've been through either, and be willing to take a back seat and literally let you be the expert to tell me, what was it like to be in solitary for 10 years? What's it like to be a Black body when you're incarcerated, a young Black body, a young male Black body? And so I think it helps us limit our belief that we have expertise when it's necessary too.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Esther. I really like how you highlight that, as our panel here really shows that lived experience is not this, catch-all category, right? There's a lot of nuance within there. And even within this carceral experience, right, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of different experiences that exist within that. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. I think this is a good segue into my next question, thinking about, CJ's comment about asking the questions, right? So as academics, we ask a whole lot of questions and we come up with some answers, but I think more questions usually than answers. So what barriers have you faced in getting involved in academia due to your lived experience? And how have you overcome those barriers?
I can kind of speak to that because I just went on the market and did encounter some barriers. And of course, as researchers, we encounter barriers, right? Every time I put in an application to go into a carceral setting, I'm always very nervous that they're going to see my background and they're not going to let me in. It's not happened yet, thank goodness, fingers crossed, knock on wood. But I'm also very nervous that they're going to have a perception that I'm going to be out to get them. And so I think I worry a lot about that stigma on the research side, but on the employment side, I applied to several jobs, and of course, anybody who has a history knows rejection really, really, really well in the employment field. Rejection, as soon as you hit the submit button, you get the automatic rejection. 100% it's because of your criminal conviction. And I was lucky enough to not have that happen often when I was applying for jobs, but even with a PhD, I was rejected immediately for an academic position in Texas and quickly found out there was nothing I could do about that. It was related to my conviction. They wouldn't even consider my application because of it, despite it being the actual conviction being 14 years ago. And so you're constantly being reminded that you have this and it will never go away, at least not in the United States, probably in my lifetime. I will probably always have to disclose. And so it really limits my research experiences and my employment experiences, not to the degree that it used to, but it's still a very real stigma, and it creates these very real barriers. And I think that that's one area where we can really work on social justice, right? If we want people to really have a second chance, we have to work on getting rid of these barriers so people have access after they've been incarcerated.
I think I can piggyback on that. It's kind of hard to explain, like when you've done like a certain set of like things, right? And you're like, well, I have messed up my opportunity to now accomplish something really cool, right? Like when I was young, I thought I was going to go to the NFL, right? I was like 6'3", 250. I could run fast. Everybody saw me. They're like, oh man, old people talk about you like you're not even there. Like I'm right next to them. They're like, oh, this kid CJ is going to be this great football player, all this stuff. I thought I was going to be this, and I thought that was going to be the thing, right? And when I messed up that opportunity and then I got a record at the same time, it was, well, what's the point now, right? Because there's no, like, football's gone, but also, once you start getting told no, once you can't work at like, you can't get a job at like the pizza place, you know what I mean? And you're like, well, what is there now for me, right? Like I thought I was going to be this great and wonderful thing. And now I can't even get access to the most basic thing that I don't even really actually want, right? I can't even get access to this thing I don't even want. And this thing other people don't want either, right? And so for me, the biggest barrier was being vulnerable enough to dream again, being vulnerable enough to hope again. And me personally, I'm going through this whole process on the belief that somebody's going to give me a job at the end of this. You know what I mean? And that's not a guarantee. So I think that for me, it was multiple levels of barriers. Even when I went back to community college and I was a really good student, people were like, oh, you should get a PhD, but I had been in the system so long and I spent 10 years ruining my life. I had to catch up. I'm like, well, I can't spend 8 more years in school. I got time I got to catch up for. I got all these things that I haven't done. And everybody else who's 28, 29 years old, they have house and family and all these different things. And you want me to be in school for another 8 years? Like, that's crazy. So that was a barrier, this feeling like I needed to catch up. Then it was a barrier that even when I did apply, the school that I applied to initially, I knew I was going to get in, right? Because I didn't want to dare hope or reach for higher heights, right? So I applied for my PhD and I was thinking it was all good until my mentor at the time was like, what are you doing here? You need to leave. You need to get out of this school. You need to go to one of the best universities in the entire country. And that's because that's of the caliber that you are. And I'm sitting there like, okay, buddy, this is what you don't understand is that, like, I have to go through that again. Now I have to apply again. And now I have to, now I have to potentially get told no and all these different things. And so one of my biggest barriers, because of the experiences I've had in the criminal justice system, is in valuing myself and in valuing what I have to bring to the table, and being able to be okay with whoever gets me a job at the end of this, then I got to go there and kill it because that's my space, and really becoming like okay with that. And so that's my answer.
All right, thank you, CJ. Cait or Andrew, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. For me, again, my experience coming sort of from the other side of things, this has actually facilitated my entry into academia because I have the privilege of having worked in a correction system as being something positive to put on your resume. And you sort of look at the different systems of privilege and things and how that's operating there. That's so drastically not the case for residents in the system and things like that. But I'll talk a little bit more about my research focus over the last couple of years. I've been fortunate that I've been able to pursue this, is looking at the experiences of transgender individuals in the criminal legal system, specifically in correctional institutions, and looking at housing decisions and attending to medical needs and things like that. But it was really telling to me that when I went to put in, speaking with my advisors and stuff about wanting to pursue that area as my dissertation, I was actively discouraged from doing so because they were worried that it was going to constrain my opportunities on the academic job market. So it's just very telling to me the extent to which we value your experience, but really only so far as we find it valuable or palatable. And I will say that this advisor was looking out for my best interest. It was obviously a disappointing conversation. But I think that just sort of goes, we have some pretty carefully prescribed boundaries, even within the field of criminal legal scholarship, about what we find valuable or what we want to talk about or what people are interested in. You negotiate those boundaries when you're talking about your lived experience and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of to echo what Cait was saying, I've noticed when it comes to doing the work that we do in terms of research here, I think for the most part, when we're trying to get, kind of echoing Johnny's point earlier, these relationships with the people that we're doing research on or research with, it's hard to do so because, at least in academia, it's expected that, qualitative research in a way isn't as valuable as mixed methods or quantitative would be. I've been told, like, for in the future, when I apply to the job market or when I get on the job market, it's important for me to kind of diversify and put quantitative stuff on my CV. But I understand that with the people that I want to interact with, have relationships with, and continue to build and talk and give their stories, it's necessary to do it in a qualitative way. I'm being intentional here in the sense that I want the world to know what they're talking about, what their experience was as a carceral resident. Numbers here don't really matter. And so I think it's difficult to put into words how necessary it is for our work, especially like people like CJ and Esther who actually have more experience or lived experience. Like for myself, although I do in a way have a lived experience, right? I'm privileged in that my interaction with the criminal legal system was as an outsider. My dad was incarcerated. I luckily didn't have that interaction. But we need these voices here, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Thank you all. I really like how you've all highlighted kind of nuanced aspects of some barriers that you faced, right? It's not just the barriers that I think people think of in terms of checking a box, getting those rejections like Esther highlighted, but also in what people kind of expect you to be interested in, or in what people discourage you from being interested in as a result of your experience. I want to now sprinkle in a little controversy here and talk about a New York Times op-ed that was published this Sunday. So the op-ed argued that there are limits to elevating voices with lived experience, specifically that it leads to less cultural and intellectual diversity because it privileges some voices, in other words, those with lived experience, over others. I want to ask you as panelists and as folks with lived experience, does highlighting lived experience leave us with more or less diversity in our society? And also keeping in mind the theme of our symposium here, does it advance social justice?
I can actually give a controversial answer to this, and my fellow panelists might not agree, but I actually don't think the article's wrong. So I don't identify, I mean, within limits, right? I think everything is on a continuum, and I get so frustrated when we want to go to one side or the other, because very rarely is a solution that's on one end of the continuum going to work. And so, I'll just throw controversy out here. This isn't going to be a calm discussion. So there's a division within criminology called Convict Criminology. I have chosen not to identify myself as a convict criminologist. And one of the reasons that I chose that is that one of the aspects of their ideology is that lived experience should be prioritized over other types of scholarship, and really only people with lived experience should be doing this research. And I think we all have biases, right? Every time I walk into a prison, I remember what it was like to be incarcerated. I remember what it was like to be spoken to in certain ways by staff. I will always come to every single encounter I have in life with a plethora of experience. And for people to say they're objective, in my mind, it's naive. We're not, right? And it's an exaggeration. And so I think I will always come to every prison and every interview with my experience. And I just don't think it's right for me to think that my experience is more valuable or more correct than someone else's. That said, so I think in research by people and input by people that don't have a lived experience is valid as well. The only caveat I'll put on that is that I think you have to prioritize lived experience if you're trying to prioritize your voice over mine, right? If I'm telling you how something felt and how it impacts me and you don't have that experience, you don't have the right to disagree with me, right? I've never experienced racism. And so I don't have a right to tell somebody how they should be affected by it, how much trauma they should have, how they should deal with it, because I don't know. And I think we just have to admit our limitations. And that includes my own. I have one perspective of a white female in a pretty cushy federal system. I did serve 14 months in county, so lots of constant confinement, but I have a very small snippet of experience. And when I'm talking to my best friend who has 28 years down from the age of 14 and literally had to fight constantly for the first 10 years of his incarceration, I don't ever tell him how to deal with the way he experienced racism or trauma or anger, because I don't have that right. And so I think we just have to really respect the views of other people, but also understand the limitations of our lived experience.
Yeah, I really agree, Esther. And I think, when I was reading the article, what I think I come down to is that the author is speaking about incredibly nuanced issues in a way that's not nuanced at all, right? She's using extremely broad strokes. She's generalizing, and it's creating sort of this straw man article this straw man argument that people are agreeing with, when she's not really presenting what the debate is really about. And so, for instance, she says, would you tell Tolstoy that he shouldn't have written Anna Karenina because he wasn't a woman? And it's like, what a reductive way of looking at this argument, especially since Tolstoy's experience was that he was incredibly well-versed with issues of class conflict in Russia and different things like that. And because there is an enormous amount of feminist criticism about Anna Karenina, that he has developed the male characters way more than the female characters, and many of them are very two-dimensional and vapid and all these different things. So it's a silly argument to make. This is what I'm talking about, nuance. You can just go and go and go and go. And what I found very galling about the article was that, in my mind, she is clearly conflating efforts to limit cultural appropriation, efforts to give opportunity to voices that have historically been excluded from conversations. She's conflating all that with what she calls a turf war, which is, I have the right to write about this and you don't, or I have the right to write about this and you think that I don't. And it's just not that at all. And so it's very frustrating. And don't read everybody says, don't read the comments, because they're kind of soul crushing, because all these people are like, yeah, exactly, I've been saying this for 50 years. And it's frustrating. It is, in my mind, a poorly reasoned argument for a debate that's much more valid if you can speak about it in a better way, is what I would say. And I think Esther did just exactly that. She's speaking about it in a more nuanced way that I think can educate people rather than constricting their viewpoint on the subject.
So it sounds like there might be some worthwhile strands of argument in that piece. But overall, I'm hearing that the piece did not make those arguments very well. Do we have other thoughts on that from Andrew or CJ?
Well, I know for me, I've been upsetting people for many years. I'm 37 years old, and I think I upset somebody for the first time maybe like a couple months out of the womb. So I'm a veteran in this. I have a feeling that, and on your path towards something that is right, you will make people upset. And one of the markers for knowing you're going in the right direction is somebody coming up to you and saying, wow, your work is very impactful to me. I really like it. Like, it changed my life, all those different things, right? That's one piece. The other piece is you're making certain people mad in certain ways. That's also confirmation. I'm headed in the right direction. You know what I mean? And when I read that op-ed, I'm like, this is a certain type of salt, right? This is a certain type of saltiness that I feel like in order for us to actually elevate lived experiences to where they need to be, this is the tip of the iceberg of salt, right? This is just the beginning, because there's more that will come. I imagine, like, when people with lived experience begin to actually be able to compete on an even playing field with people who don't, for jobs that matter, for positions that matter, for positions of power, there's going to be more. right? There's going to be this thing where actually, no, you're being discriminatory because you're now, you know what I'm saying? It's coming. It's coming. And so I personally, at the beginning, I was irritated, but then I was a little bit like, I don't know, I was a little bit encouraged by the fact that, like, if this is out there, that means that something right is happening in our society. There's actually a movement occurring, because if there was no movement, there'd be no op-ed. It wouldn't have been accepted. It wouldn't be interesting enough for people. And so, yeah, that's what I think.
Follow up with that real quick. Do you feel that, you know, like you said, CJ, there's this movement to highlight lived experience. Do you feel that as folks with lived experience, that experience is listened to and valued in your interactions? Or do you feel like sometimes that's dismissed as anecdote, as, you know, opinion, or even as bias?
Listen, just real quick, nobody cared about my lived experience until I was successful, right? When I was in the mud, when I was a hot mess with one pair of shorts and no pants, and I didn't have nothing, and I was in drug treatment, nobody cared what I had to say about the system, right? Nobody cared. And now that I'm a PhD candidate, and it's just like, oh yeah, it's this fantastical thing, right? But like, so I don't think that I'm listened to. My experience is listened to. I think my status is listened to more than my experience. And so that's what I think.
I'll also say, so I do think sometimes my experience does get me an interview. And I think that that's probably going to be many of our experiences. And then when you're on the interview, you're like, oh, I get it. I'm the candidate that needed to be here, but that never had a chance. And you definitely feel that. And there's definitely a feeling of being tokenized, because I think at many of our institutions, we are going to be the only formerly incarcerated faculty, possibly in the entire university. And, you know, I believe in being very upfront and open, and my experience as a first-year faculty member, it did not escape my notice that things would happen on campus, and people who said they valued my lived experience never asked for my input on how we should handle certain things that happened on campus. And so I would be asked to sign letters calling for the criminalization of an incident on campus or something else without ever asking me. So there are certain conversations that we will not be invited to, even though people say that we should be invited to. And I really applauded CJ's comment that right now we're just at the fringes and we're being kept at the fringes. And once we stop being kept at the fringes, there's going to be a whole lot more pushback, as I have encountered in my first year at an institution where I'm never going to stand on the fringes. You encounter that pushback, and it is brutal and difficult. But I think everybody on this panel is willing to take up that fight. And I think that's why panels like this are really, really important. And I appreciate everybody sharing their perspectives.
Cait, I'm going to pick on you for a second and ask you this question, because as you pointed out, you come at this with a bit of a different lens, right? And so in your work in corrections or in any aspect of criminal legal system work that you've done in your career, do you find that bringing up your experiences working within the system, do you find that to be valued and to be listened to in any kind of way, or do you find that to be dismissed?
Yeah, again, in a very fortunate and privileged position that generally it's listened to, or at least there's the pretense of it being listened to. You know, people say, yes, this is, you know, a valuable contribution, things like that. Yeah, so I'd say generally very unfortunate position to be able to take my experience and have it be a pretty notable positive among a lot of people for my ability to sort of be in this field and everything. Yeah, absolutely. I'd say yes.
All right, thank you, Cait. I know I have more questions and I could probably go on all day with them, but we're getting some interesting questions in the Q&A here that I want to move to. So we have one here from a federal probation officer of 8 years experience who says that they question a lot of things. And they highlight that there's been a shift to view probation officers as change agents, but yet our system still doesn't hire people with lived experience for anything other than possibly unpaid or very informal mentorship to others on probation or supervised release. And they go on to say, if we believe people can change, then why are we not accepting their change and valuing that? So where are you all on allowing people with lived experience to be employed in criminal justice fields like police, probation, prisons, etc., and not just academia?
Go ahead, TJ.
So one of the things, I don't know if everybody's keyed into, I'm like in getting my toes wet in this dissertation stuff, which I'm doing this narrative identity stuff, right? And so like there's this concept of redemption, and there's this like common like theme when you've been through something, and then you have like this generative this desire to help others, right? This desire to make sure others don't experience the same hardships, this desire, right? And so this is a common thing, not for everybody, but it's very common for people who have, re-entered. And so I am at some point, when I'm a good enough writer, going to write a thought piece. I've tried to write one of those before and it has been ripped to shreds. But when I'm a better writer, I will write a thought piece on the people who have the stamina, right, to work within a corrupted, under-resourced system are exactly the people who have been in the system, right? They're the people who have the stamina. They're the people who have the motivation. They're the people who have enough gas in the tank to be able to say, I'm still going to push. I'm still going to push because it means something a little bit more. And I think that there's an argument to be made. I agree with the person. I think that there's an argument to be made that that especially being under-resourced and especially under the conditions that are currently there, that it's almost a requirement for our system to work at maximum capacity, is to have people who can be more effective in their job by just being able to relate to people and just being able to get them to recognize, I'm not here to get you. And so I agree with that. I think it's a long haul, once again, because then you're going to be people are going to be perceiving you're taking jobs from other people who want them, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's worth a fight.
Yeah, I agree with CJ. I think all of us who have lived experience and are interested in redemption and changing the system understand that we are definitely in for the fight. And I think we also understand that we are all up for the fight. And so that's important to me. But I love the fact that a probation officer asked about being a change agent. In my mind, that's the only way we're ever going to see desistance start to become the norm instead of recidivating being the norm. And I have a very unequivocal answer: should people with lived experience be allowed to work in law enforcement? People with lived experience and criminal history should be allowed to do whatever job they want to. There should be no barriers. If I want to be a doctor, if I want to be a lawyer, if I want to be a teacher, if I want to be whatever I want to be, I should be allowed to be that, as long as I have not been, engaged in criminal activity. And Megan Kurlichek, others too, but I love the way Megan talks about it, has published some really great research that people who've been out pose no greater risk for a certain number of years, pose no greater risk than anyone else in our society who does not have a conviction. And so it's not only a personal feeling, it is backed up with evidence. I am no more of a risk to anyone at any time for any reason than anybody else that I sit next to anywhere. And so I should have the same right to apply for anything that they apply for.
What's interesting to me is all these organizations and institutions within the criminal legal system have complained for years and decades that there's always these openings when it comes to jobs that they need filled, but automatically they disqualify most of the people that want to take these positions. And even then, so certain positions that that people may have qualifications for, they set the qualification standards too high for anyone to be able to achieve the position that they actually want to. And especially with, like, kind of to CJ and Esther's point, these are the people that actually that have the stamina to create the change, to make the system and society a better place, but they're eliminating them off the bat. And without any change when it comes to this in the future, it's going to be kind of a repetitive system.
All right. Thank you all for those answers, and thank you to Wendy for asking that question.
I got one more quick thing. I actually think we're less risky, because let me tell you, I am the squarest person that I know. Like, when I hear about my buddies doing their taxes and I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, you guys are wild. Taxes, they're committing little petty this and petty that. I'm like, I'm not doing none of that. You guys are tripping. I'm not even parking in the wrong spot with my emergency light on. And so I think that we're actually the safest people. If you ever see me, kind of like Superman, it's the safest. We're the safest people to be around, honestly, in a lot of cases, I think.
Thank you, CJ. Although I've yet to meet the person who will call you square. All right. So we got two more questions here that I see them as kind of aligned, so I'm going to mix them together. So thinking about academics who don't have lived experience, right? What are the pieces of advice that you would give to them in advancing their work and advancing social justice, and also in terms of how they can support folks with lived experience in academia?
I think the simplest answer to that, the first part of the question, would be look for opportunities, even if it's just peripheral, to increase your quote unquote lived experience. In this department, we're very fortunate that we have research projects going, whether it be within the corrections, carceral institutions, probation, parole, things like that. You might have to be proactive about reaching out in that way that you can get lived experience, even if it's just primarily through, the lens of research. I think that's very important. And how can you support people? Just please don't be dismissive of experiences. When somebody tells you what's happening, believe them. Be very conscious of, for me, for instance, being a trans or gender nonconforming person. Again, this ties into the discussion about my dissertation. This person was like, you might be too close to this subject. You might take it a little too personally. First of all, what a ridiculous thing to say. I can't imagine that, that they would find it appropriate to say something like that in a different context. But secondly, I don't think it was really about any concern for myself. I think it was about trying to come up with a legitimate way to exclude this area of discourse and scholarship, right? I don't think this person was doing that intentionally, but certainly unintentionally, that I think that was the driving force. So when people tell you what's going on, believe them. Do your best to try to check your unconscious biases and be very cognizant of your conversations and the way that you interact with people.
I'll add in two points. So I think for academics who don't have a lived experience, try to be as participatory in your research as is possible, right? And that means having people who are participants help you design the research design. To CJ's point, let them help you design the questions, maybe let them ask the questions. They know what questions need to be asked, and let them help you collect and analyze the data, right? Not just one token participatory part, but give them access to the whole process, right? Have them as co-collaborators with equal voice. I think that's really the way that you can do that. And I'm just going to give a real quick plug to Abigail Henson, who she came out of Temple and she's now at ASU. And the first time I saw Abby tweeting on Twitter, I thought that girl has lived experience. And the first time I was lucky enough to meet her, I fangirled her, I'm going to admit it. But I found out she didn't have lived experience. And so if you prioritize and value voices and you listen to people with lived experience, you can really improve your perspective. And Abby is a perfect example of that. And really just lastly to CJ's point, I could not agree with him more that when I walk into a prison and I talk to people and ask them, what is successful reentry to you? And if I hear another one of them say their dream job is to be a construction worker, I'm gonna lose my mind, right? Like, please, that is not what you wanted to be when you were 5. Like, get your dreams back. And so I think an important part of social justice, you don't have to have lived experience to help us dream and to help us remember what we wanted to be before. And so I think that's really how academics can help.
I think that a lot of it's in finding the people early in the experience. So creating an environment that is safe for disclosure is important in your classroom, because you may have a student who has lived experience and you will never know because it's not always cool to talk about it. And if somebody's willing to disclose that, then to Esther's point, giving them permission to dream that dream, giving them permission. It takes a lot to get through those barriers. I had about 40 people tell me you should get your PhD, and I told every single one of them they were crazy. And like, this is over the course of time and being patient and being able to say, no, like, you don't realize how valuable it is. You don't realize how valuable you are. And we like to, give people compliments when they receive them. And we don't like to give people compliments who bat them away. It's harder, like, oh man, it's hard to get through this person, but it's so valuable and it's so necessary. So I think personally, valuing those voices and creating environments that are safe for disclosure are critical, because there are some really talented people that feel like they have to go it alone and feel like they have to be motivated, find motivation in certain areas, and they don't receive it in all the areas that they could, because they're keeping their cards hidden. So that's what I think.
Well, I'm sure that we could talk about this all day. If there are any last minute questions from the audience, we can try to squeeze them in. Otherwise, I will wrap this up. So seeing none, I want to just thank all 4 of you for joining us today. This has been an awesome discussion. I really enjoyed it wholeheartedly. I also want to thank everyone in the audience for coming and sharing this space with us. This has been really, really great. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of the symposium, including the upcoming spotlight session on social justice and social media with Dr. Stacy Houston. Be sure to stick around for that. And one last time, thank you, all 4 of you, for being vulnerable, sharing your stories. It's been great.
And thank you, Ace, for giving us the space to do that. So I appreciate it. I'm with CJ. Ace is great, right?
Oh, thank you all. This is awesome. I love seeing you and hearing you. We really appreciate your voice. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, very, very
Thanks,
pleased and
everyone.
proud to be here.
Yes, same.